The cantina on Nexus Station had all the charm of a decommissioned morgue, which explained why Commander Vex liked drinking there. The establishment's owner, a multi-limbed creature whose species name translated roughly to regretful life choices, served beverages that could dissolve titanium and asked no questions about the clientele's past or present war crimes. Perfect for someone whose reputation preceded her like a plague warning. Vex sat in the corner booth she'd claimed 3 standard hours ago, watching condensation from her glass eat through the table's synthetic surface. Her drink was something the locals called void burn, appropriate considering it tasted like liquid despair and probably violated several interstellar chemical weapons treaties. The first potential client shuffled over at 1400 hours, standard galactic time. A Cytherian ambassador, judging by the crystalline growths jutting from what might generously be called shoulders. His species communicated through harmonic resonance, which meant his opening gambit sounded like someone torturing a violin. "Commander Vex," the crystal being chimed. "We require your services for a matter of utmost—" "No." She didn't look up from her drink. "But you haven't heard our offer." "Don't need to. Whatever's got your facets in a twist, I'm not interested." Vex took another sip of liquid regret. "Try the Mercenary Guild on level 7. They love hopeless causes." The Cytherian's harmonics shifted to what she recognized as profound irritation, a sound like nails on glass having an argument. "This concerns the void sector. Something has awakened that threatens all sentient life." "Still no. We offer 50 million credits. Make it 100 and I'll consider caring." The ambassador's crystalline structure dimmed. We don't have 100 million credits. The entity has already consumed 3 of our colony worlds." Vex finally glanced up, fixing him with eyes that had seen too much and weren't particularly impressed by any of it. "Then you don't have a problem worth my time." The Cytherian departed with the sound of breaking glass, leaving behind the faint smell of ozone and wounded pride. Client number 2 arrived 30 minutes later. This one belonged to the hegemony of scales, a reptilian species that had somehow convinced themselves that bureaucracy was the highest form of art. The representative wore the elaborate ceremonial robes that indicated middle management, which meant she was either very important or completely expendable. "Commander Vex, I bring greetings from the Hegemony Council of, let me guess, something terrible in the void sector. Ancient evil, threatens all life. You need someone expendable to poke it with a stick." The reptilian official blinked her nictitating membranes in what Vex had learned was surprise. "How did you—" "Lucky guess. What's your budget?" "The Hegemony is prepared to offer territorial concessions, trade agreements, and a formal apology for that unfortunate incident with your homeworld's diplomatic mission." Vex snorted. "The incident where your people tried to serve our ambassador at a state dinner?" "Cultural misunderstanding. We've since updated our xenobiology protocols." "Pass." "But Commander, surely you understand the gravity. I understand that your species thinks everything can be solved with the right paperwork. This doesn't sound like a filing problem." The hegemony representative slithered away, muttering something in her native tongue that the universal translator tactfully rendered as agricultural implements. The third visitor waited until the evening shift change, when the cantina's lighting dimmed to accommodate species that found photons personally offensive. This one was harder to identify, a writhing mass of tentacles and bioluminescent patches that suggested deep ocean origins. When it spoke, the words emerged from a translator box grafted to what might have been its torso. "Human mercenary, we have monitored your reputation. Congratulations. Want a medal? We represent the Abyssal Collective. Our offer supersedes all others." Vex raised an eyebrow. The collective controlled most of the galaxy's deep water worlds and had resources that made other species' treasuries look like children's allowance money. I'm listening. 1 billion credits. Immediate transfer to any account you designate. That got her attention. She set down her glass and studied the writhing mass of alien biology. What's the catch? No catch. Only necessity. The entity in the void sector has begun manifesting our species' deepest fears. Our people face extinction by nightmare made manifest. Your nightmares involve drowning, I assume? The translator box sparked before responding. Worse, infinite dryness, endless light, the terror of existing without the embrace of crushing depths. Several tentacles shuddered. Our most ancient myths speak of such torment. Vex considered this. 1 billion credits would buy her own planet, complete with luxury amenities and a decent wine cellar. But something about the whole situation felt wrong. Not morally wrong. She'd abandoned that particular compass years ago, but tactically wrong. Why me? The galaxy's full of mercenaries with better success rates and lower insurance premiums. Because, the creature replied, this entity feeds on fear. It manifests each species' cultural terrors and uses them as weapons. We need someone it cannot frighten. And you think that's me? We know your species' reputation. Humans are unusual in their relationship with danger. Before Vex could respond, footsteps approached their table. She looked up to see a figure she hadn't expected, a human in diplomatic attire, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd survived too many formal dinners. Commander Vex? I'm Attaché Chen from the Terran Embassy. Mind if I join you? The Abyssal Collective's representative extended several tentacles in what Vex recognized as a territorial display. We were conducting business. Actually, Chen said, settling into the booth with practiced ease. I think our friend here was just leaving. The Collective's offer is generous but ultimately pointless. The alien's bioluminescent patches flared. You dare interfere with what? A suicide mission disguised as a business transaction? Chen smiled with diplomatic politeness. The entity in the void sector isn't something you can simply throw money at, Commander. It's older than most of our civilizations, and considerably more creative. Vex watched this exchange with growing interest. In her experience, diplomats only showed up when situations had moved beyond military solutions into the realm of genuinely apocalyptic disasters. The Collective's representative departed with the sort of wet, sliding sounds that suggested deep personal offense. Chen waited until the cantina's background noise resumed before speaking. Tell me, Commander, what do you know about Earth's mythology? It wasn't the question she'd expected. More than most. Why? Because that thing out there, it's not just manifesting fears. It's making myths real. The Catherians are facing geometric impossibilities that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The hegemony confronts bureaucratic paradoxes that make their worst nightmares of inefficiency look like paradise. Vex leaned back, studying Chen's face. And humans? That's the interesting question, isn't it? Chen's smile held no warmth. Every species the entity encounters experiences their deepest, most primal terrors made manifest. But humans... He paused, as if considering his words carefully. Humans have already imagined every possible way to die, suffer, or face cosmic horror. Most of it became entertainment. The implication hit her like cold vacuum. You're not here to recruit me. No, Commander. I'm here to ask if you understand what you represent. Vex lifted her glass, noting how the caustic liquid had completely eaten through the bottom. I represent someone who's very expensive to hire, and even more expensive to kill. You represent a species that turned existential dread into a film genre, That made cosmic horror into bedtime stories. That took the concept of ancient evil's awakening and turned it into summer blockbusters. She met his gaze. Your point. My point, Commander, is that while every other species in the galaxy is discovering that their worst nightmares are real, humanity is about to discover that cosmic horror is derivative. Chen stood, straightening his diplomatic jacket. The question isn't whether you'll take the job. The question is whether you'll enjoy it. As he walked away, Vex found herself alone with her thoughts, and a drink that had dissolved its own container. Around her, the cantina's patrons continued their various forms of liquid-assisted self-medication, blissfully unaware that somewhere in the void sector, something ancient was about to discover that some species' imagination was far worse than reality. She raised her glass in a mock toast to the empty air. Well, she said to no one in particular, this should be interesting. The glass finally gave up its structural integrity and collapsed, spilling what remained of her drink across the ruined table. Even the cantina's owner, who had seen customers survive things that should have been fatal, took one look at the spreading puddle and decided that some stains were best left unexplained. The coalition vessel Harmony's Edge was a testament to what happened when 12 different species tried to build something together. It looked like a space station had explosive diarrhea, and someone decided to call the result architecture. Commander Vex had seen prettier disasters in active war zones. She found herself in Conference Room Epsilon, which the ship's designers had optimized for maximum interspecies comfort. This meant the atmosphere was breathable for oxygen users, toxic for methane breathers, and merely uncomfortable for everyone else. The gravity was set to universal standard, which satisfied absolutely no one and left most delegates either floating slightly or pressed uncomfortably into their seats. The situation, announced Prime Analyst Korth of the Stellar Confederation, has escalated beyond our worst projections. Korth belonged to a species that resembled walking furniture, all angles and wooden joints that creaked when he moved. His people had achieved spaceflight by being phenomenally boring, which turned out to be an excellent survival strategy in a universe full of interesting ways to die. Show them, hissed Representative Vash from the Serpentine Union. Her species had evolved from ambush predators, which explained their natural talent for corporate law and hostile takeovers. Show them what it did to Kepler-7. The holographic display activated, showing what had once been a thriving research colony. Now it looked like someone had fed a geometry textbook to a blender and scattered the results across 3 dimensions. Buildings twisted into impossible shapes, their angles violating several laws of physics and at least one treaty regarding architectural war crimes. The entity arrived in the Kepler system 18 standard days ago, Korth continued. Within hours, it had manifested the Catherian Imperium's deepest cultural terror, spaces that exist in more dimensions than mathematics allows. My people, resonated Ambassador Flux through his harmonic translator, describe it as architectural blasphemy. Our engineers cannot comprehend structures that have both inside and outside occurring simultaneously in 17 dimensions. Dr. Hollowbeak of the Avian Collective ruffled her feathers in distress. Her species had conquered the skies of a dozen worlds, but their greatest fear involved being perpetually grounded. The entity adapted quickly. When it reached our orbital platforms, it manifested infinite gravity wells. Our people experienced the terror of permanent flight, forever soaring but never landing. Vex leaned back in her chair, which had been designed by committee and satisfied no known species concept of comfort. Let me understand this. The entity reads your cultural nightmares and makes them real. More sophisticated than that, rumbled Deep Speaker Maul from the Abyssal Collective. His translation unit sparked with moisture. It doesn't merely manifest fears, it weaponizes mythology, Our most ancient stories become tactical reality. The hegemony of scales faced bureaucratic impossibilities, added Administrator Third Class Slith. Forms that required themselves to be completed before they could be filled out. Approval processes that created temporal paradoxes. Our most efficient systems became monuments to administrative futility. Vex found herself genuinely curious. How do you even fight something like that? We tried conventional weapons, said General Thax of the warrior castes. His species looked like someone had crossbred a rhinoceros with a furniture store, and their solution to most problems involved creative applications of high explosives. The entity absorbed our plasma bombardments and used the energy to make our fears more vivid. Psychological warfare proved equally futile, added mind speaker Zara of the telepathic consortium. Her people communicated through shared thoughts, which made their greatest terror the prospect of absolute mental isolation. It turned our own psychic defenses against us, creating zones of perfect silence where no thought could touch another. The holographic display shifted, showing system after system consumed by manifestations of species-specific terror. Each civilization's response followed predictable patterns: initial denial, desperate military action, psychological breakdown, then extinction or evacuation. 12 species, said Prime Analyst Korth. 12 different approaches. 12 failures. What about evacuation? Vex asked. Where would we go? Dr. Hollowbeak's voice carried the weight of existential exhaustion. The entity follows. It feeds on fear, and fear travels with the fleeing. Representative Vash coiled her serpentine body in frustration. Our ancestors spoke of such entities in the oldest myths: devourers of dreams, nightmare shepherds. We thought them metaphors. Metaphors, observed Deep Speaker Mull, apparently have teeth. Vex studied the assembled representatives. Each species brought their own cultural baggage to the crisis, and their solutions reflected their fundamental nature. The Stellar Confederation had tried logic. The warrior castes had tried violence. The telepaths had tried understanding. All had discovered that ancient cosmic entities were refreshingly immune to conventional problem-solving. What makes you think humans would be any different? She asked. The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for funerals and tax audits. Mind speaker Zara finally responded, her telepathic emanations carefully modulated through the universal translator. Your species' psychological profiles are anomalous. Most civilizations develop cultural fears based on genuine threats to survival. Predators, environmental hazards, resource scarcity. Humans, Administrator Slith interjected, created elaborate fictional scenarios specifically to terrify themselves, for entertainment. Vex felt a smile tugging at her lips. You mean horror movies? Among other phenomena, confirmed Dr. Hollowbeak. Your literature, your visual media, your recreational activities, all demonstrate a peculiar fascination with manufactured terror. General Thax leaned forward, his bulk making the conference furniture groan in protest. Our intelligence analysis suggests humans actively seek out frightening experiences when their environment fails to provide sufficient danger. You pay credits to experience simulated peril, added Deep Speaker Mull. This behavior pattern appears unique among known species. The implications were starting to crystallize in Vex's mind. You think the entity won't be able to scare us because we've already imagined everything? We think, said Prime Analyst Korth carefully, that humanity's relationship with fear may be fundamentally different from ours. Ambassador Flux resonated agreement through his harmonic translator. Our research indicates humans have cultural concepts for fears we never imagined: basement monsters, closet predators, social embarrassment elevated to existential threat status. The diversity is remarkable, noted mind speaker Zara. Most species develop 3 to 5 core cultural fears. Humans appear to have systematically cataloged thousands of potential terrors and created entertainment industries around them. Vex considered this assessment. In her experience, humans did tend to take perverse pride in their ability to imagine creative ways to suffer. Other species feared actual threats. Humans feared theoretical ones, metaphysical ones, and ones that violated basic logic. So your plan is to send me out there and hope I'm too jaded to be frightened. Our plan, corrected Representative Vash, is to discover what happens when an entity that feeds on fear encounters a species that has already faced every possible nightmare in fiction. The holographic display shifted again, showing the entity's current position in the void sector. It pulsed with malevolent energy, surrounded by the twisted remains of several dozen star systems. It's growing stronger, observed General Thax. Each civilization it consumes adds to its power. And it's learning, added Dr. Hollowbeak. The manifestations become more sophisticated with each encounter. Vex stood, noting how the variable gravity made the simple action feel like a negotiation with physics. What happens if you're wrong? What if it turns out humans have fears you haven't cataloged? The assembled representatives exchanged glances that transcended species barriers, the universal look of people who had run out of alternatives. Then, said Prime Analyst Korth with the devastating honesty that his species was famous for, we discover what scares the species that made cosmic horror into children's bedtime stories. The strike vessel calculated risk, looked like it had been assembled by someone who understood engineering but had never actually seen a spaceship. Its hull bore the scars of hasty multi-species collaboration, Catherian crystal matrices fused to hegemony armor plating, with abyssal biomechanical interfaces crawling across surfaces that the Avian Collective had optimized for aerodynamics in vacuum. Commander Vex stood on what the ship's designers optimistically called a bridge, watching her assembled team perform final equipment checks. The crew represented peak military efficiency from 6 different civilizations, which meant they disagreed about everything from tactical doctrine to the proper way to hold a weapon. Perimeter established, reported Sergeant Grex of the warrior castes, his exoskeleton bristling with enough firepower to level a city block. No hostile contacts detected. Define hostile, muttered Specialist Whisper from the telepathic consortium. Her species communicated through shared consciousness, making her the natural choice for monitoring psychic disturbances. Everything in this sector radiates malevolent intent. They were 3 light hours into the void sector, where reality had begun showing signs of severe indigestion. Stars flickered with colors that didn't exist in standard physics, and space itself occasionally forgot which direction was supposed to be up. Flight Captain Soar of the Avian Collective adjusted the navigation controls with Talon precision. Approaching the first manifestation zone, recommend extreme caution. Through the forward viewport, Vex could see what had once been the Meridian binary system. The twin stars now orbited each other in patterns that violated orbital mechanics, while the planets had been rearranged into geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. Catherian nightmare territory, observed Dr. Synthesis, the expedition's xenobiologist. Her crystalline form resonated with harmonic distress. My people's greatest terror, spaces that exist improperly. The ship shuddered as they entered the manifested fear zone. Reality became negotiable. Corridors led to rooms that were bigger on the outside than the inside. Doorways opened onto themselves. The ship's artificial gravity gave up entirely and started pointing in directions that didn't have names. Fascinating, said Vex, watching a wrench float past her head while simultaneously falling toward the ceiling. It's like someone fed architectural blueprints to a drunk philosopher. Her alien crewmates were considerably less amused. Sergeant Grex had gone completely rigid, his combat instincts unable to process, an environment where cover might suddenly decide to become the enemy. Specialist Whisper had retreated into meditation, trying to block out psychic emanations that felt like geometry screaming. "How are you not affected?" Dr. Synthesis asked through harmonics that sounded like breaking glass. "The dimensional distortions should be causing severe psychological trauma." Vex shrugged, steadying herself against a wall that was perpendicular to itself. "I've seen weirder stuff in abstract art museums." They pushed deeper into the nightmare landscape, collecting sensor data that would probably give the analysis teams back home severe headaches. Each manifestation zone reflected a different species' deepest cultural terror, layered on top of each other like geological strata of fear. The hegemony sectors were filled with bureaucratic impossibilities, forms that required approval from committees that couldn't exist until the forms were completed, licensing requirements that created temporal paradoxes, and administrative procedures that had achieved sentience and were filing complaints against their own existence. "My ancestors' worst fears," Administrator Coyle observed, her scales rippling with distress. "Inefficiency made manifest." Vex examined a floating permit that was simultaneously approved and denied while being processed by an office that existed only on Tuesdays. "You know, back home we just call this Tuesday." The abyssal zones were equally specialized. Vast regions of space had been drained of all moisture, creating cosmic deserts where the concept of liquid had been banned by local physics. Artificial stars blazed with intensity that made water molecules weep and flee. "The eternal dry," Deep Speaker Current translated through his moisture-damaged communication device. "Our species' ultimate nightmare." "Looks like Arizona in August," Vex commented, watching a nebula evaporate from pure thirst. Her casual reactions to each manifestation were beginning to unnerve the crew. As they encountered more nightmare zones, regions where the avian collective faced infinite gravity wells, areas where the warrior castes confronted pacifist logic made tangible, spaces where telepaths experienced absolute mental isolation, Vex continued to treat cosmic horror as a mild inconvenience. "Commander," Flight Captain Soar said during their approach to the entity's core territory, "perhaps you could explain your unusual resistance to these manifestations." Vex considered the question while watching a planet-sized manifestation of social anxiety make small talk with a moon. "I think it's because we've already been here." "Impossible. Humans have never encountered, not physically, culturally. Every nightmare we're seeing, humans have already turned into entertainment. Impossible architecture? We call that surreal horror and give it film festivals. Bureaucratic paradoxes? That's Tuesday afternoon at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Cosmic dread? We made Lovecraft a best-selling author." Specialist Whisper emerged from her meditation, her telepathic emanations carrying confusion. "You're suggesting your species has already experienced these terrors through fictional simulation?" "More than that. We've commercialized them, turned them into theme park attractions, made them into video games where the goal is to survive increasingly creative forms of psychological trauma." The ship's sensors detected massive energy signatures ahead, the entity's core presence. Through the viewport, they could see something that defied description in any language currently spoken by sentient species. "There," breathed Dr. Synthesis. "The source." It looked like someone had taken the concept of malevolence and given it architecture lessons. The entity existed in spaces between spaces, feeding on the fear emanations of manifestation zones, while simultaneously creating new ones. "Approaching engagement range," reported Sergeant Grex, his weapons systems targeting something that kept changing its relationship to three-dimensional space. "Negative," Vex countermanded. "We're not here to fight it." "Then what?" We're here to introduce it to human cultural exports. She activated the ship's communication array and began broadcasting toward the entity. Not weapons data or tactical information, but something far more devastating. Highlights from Earth's entertainment industry. Horror movie trailers, video game footage, novel excerpts, theme park advertisements. The entity's response was immediate and profound. Its manifestations began flickering, uncertainty creeping into their structure. Ancient intelligence encountered something it had never experienced, a species that had already imagined every possible way to be terrified and had turned the exercise into a profitable industry. It's confused, Specialist Whisper reported, her telepathic senses detecting emotional turmoil from something older than most star systems. The fear response patterns are inconsistent. Because it's trying to scare people who invented scary movies, Vex explained. We've already seen all this stuff. Most of it was directed by someone named Wes Craven. The entity attempted to adapt, reaching deeper into humanity's cultural consciousness for more primal fears. The space around their ship began manifesting new terrors: social embarrassment, missed deadlines, network connectivity issues, and the peculiar human dread of running out of coffee. Vex watched these manifestations with growing amusement. Oh, now it's just getting desperate. These are your species' deepest fears, Dr. Synthesis asked in harmonic disbelief. Some of them. The really deep ones involve things like student loan debt, printer jams, and finding out you've been mispronouncing a word your entire adult life. The entity's confusion was becoming palpable. It had encountered a species that had already cataloged, categorized, and commercialized every form of terror it could manifest. Worse, they seemed to find its efforts quaint. Commander, Flight Captain Soar said urgently, the entity is withdrawing from several manifestation zones. Its power signatures are fluctuating. Through the viewport, they could see the ancient intelligence grappling with an unprecedented problem. For eons, it had fed on fear, growing stronger with each civilization it terrorized. Now it faced something that treated its finest work like amateur theater. Time to make contact, Vex announced, opening communication channels. Entity of the Void, she broadcast. This is Commander Vex of the Terran Defense Initiative. We need to talk. The response came as a wave of pure, malevolent intent that should have driven most sentient beings to madness. Instead, Vex found herself reminded of her last performance review. The entity materialized in the ship's cargo bay with all the dramatic flair of something that had been practicing cosmic menace for geological eras. It appeared as a writhing mass of concepts that shouldn't exist, wrapped in the kind of darkness that made black holes look cheerfully illuminated. Commander Vex regarded it with the expression she usually reserved for telemarketers and tax auditors. So, she said, settling into a chair that had been bolted down to prevent it from fleeing in terror, you're the thing that's been giving everyone nightmares. The entity's response came as waves of existential dread that could have powered a small civilization's therapy industry. Around the cargo bay, reality began developing hiccups. Shadows fell upward. Time stuttered. The ship's artificial gravity started sobbing. Her alien crewmates had wisely retreated to the bridge, where they monitored the encounter through sensors that kept requesting hazard pay. Only Vex remained in the cargo bay, apparently immune to horrors that should have liquefied her sanity. I have consumed the fears of 1,000 species, the entity communicated through methods that bypassed language entirely and spoke directly to the terror centers of the brain. I am the nightmare that spawns nightmares. I am the fear behind all fears. That's nice, Vex replied, pulling out a tablet and scrolling through what appeared to be a presentation. I'm here to discuss intellectual property violations. The cosmic horror paused, which was roughly equivalent to a supernova having second thoughts. What? You've been manifesting copyrighted material without proper licensing agreements. The geometric impossibilities? That's clearly derivative of M.C. Escher's work, which is still under protection in several galactic jurisdictions. The bureaucratic paradoxes are straight out of Terry Pratchett's playbook. And don't get me started on the social anxiety manifestations. We've got entire comedy franchises built around that concept. The entity attempted to process this information, which was like trying to file a restraining order against the concept of existence itself. I manifest primal fears, cultural terrors born from the deepest… Yeah, about that. Vex tapped her tablet, bringing up a holographic display. Let me show you what humans consider primal terror. The presentation began with mundane horrors that made cosmic dread look like a weekend hobby. Automated phone systems that transferred callers into infinite loops. Assembly instructions translated through 17 languages. Social media comment sections. The discovery that someone had been using your Netflix account to watch reality television. The entity recoiled, its cosmic presence flickering as it encountered fears so petty and specific that they transcended universal terror and achieved a kind of transcendent awfulness. These are not cosmic horrors. No, Vex agreed. They're Tuesday. You want to see real terror? Let me show you what happens when humans get creative. The next series of images depicted humanity's systematic approach to manufacturing fear. Horror movies where the monster was bureaucracy itself. Video games where players competed to survive increasingly complex tax codes. Theme restaurants where the food was perfectly safe, but the waitstaff were performance artists specializing in existential dread. We turned fear into a consumer product, Vex explained with casual pride. We don't just experience terror, we market it, franchise it, and sell merchandising rights. The entity's manifestations began destabilizing. Around the cargo bay, impossible geometries started looking merely improbable. The crawling darkness developed performance anxiety. Impossible! Fear is the fundamental force, the driving energy of entertainment revenue, sure. But here's the thing about humans. We've already been afraid of everything, literally everything. We wrote books about being afraid of books. We made movies about being afraid of movies. We created support groups for people who were afraid of support groups. Vex stood, walking closer to the ancient horror while consulting her tablet. You know what your real problem is? You're thinking like an apex predator. You see fear as a tool for consumption. Humans see fear as a renewable resource. The entity attempted to manifest humanity's deepest, most primal terror. The cargo bay filled with visions of ultimate human nightmare scenarios. Expired warranties, software updates that actually make things worse, discovering that everything you believed about proper comma usage was wrong, and the heat death of the universe occurring specifically on a Monday. Vex watched these manifestations with the sort of mild interest usually reserved for weather reports. You're still not getting it, she said. These aren't our worst fears. Our worst fears are things like, what if I've been breathing wrong my entire life? And what if my personality is just an elaborate defense mechanism? The ancient intelligence found itself in the unprecedented position of being lectured on cosmic horror by something that had turned cosmic horror into a retail experience. But here's what really should terrify you, Vex continued, her voice taking on the casual tone of someone explaining a particularly obvious point. You've spent eons feeding on fear, growing stronger with each civilization you consume, but you've never encountered a species that's already afraid of being consumed by ancient cosmic entities and has turned that fear into a profitable entertainment genre. The entity's form began to destabilize as it grappled with the implications. We have entire industries built around the concept of you. Horror writers who specialize in cosmic dread. Game designers who create interactive experiences where the goal is surviving encounters with entities exactly like you. We've commodified your entire existence. This cannot be. Oh, it gets worse. We don't just survive cosmic horror. We critique it. We have professional reviewers who evaluate the quality of existential dread. We give awards for best psychological terror and most creative use of madness. The cargo bay's reality distortions began resolving themselves into normal space-time as the entity experienced something it had never encountered: performance anxiety on a cosmic scale. Your species. What are you? Vex smiled with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just won an argument with the universe itself. We're humans. We're the species that looked at an infinite cosmos full of things that could kill us and said, "Hold my beer. I want to try something." The entity's presence began to withdraw, not in defeat, but in something far more unsettling: fascination. Perhaps, it communicated with something resembling cautious respect, we should discuss collaborative opportunities. Now you're talking, Vex replied, pulling up a different section of her presentation. I represent several entertainment conglomerates that would be very interested in licensing your abilities. Theme parks, immersive experiences, corporate team-building exercises. There's a whole market for controlled terror. As the ancient cosmic horror began negotiating distribution rights for its manifestation abilities, the crew on the bridge watched in the kind of stunned silence usually reserved for witnessing miracles or tax refunds. What just happened? Dr. Synthesis asked, through harmonics that sounded like bewildered wind chimes. Attaché Chen, who had been monitoring the encounter through diplomatic channels, allowed himself a small smile. Humanity just did what it does best. It took something that was supposed to destroy us and turned it into a business opportunity. 3 standard months later, Cosmic Horror Experiences, LLC, opened its first location in the Nexus Station Entertainment District. The entity, now operating under the marketing name The Existential Dread Experience, provided controlled manifestations of species-specific fears for tourists who wanted to experience terror in a safe, regulated environment. The reviews were mixed, but profitable. Commander Vex used her consulting fees to buy a small planet in a quiet sector, where she established a brewery specializing in drinks that could dissolve starship hulls. Her establishment's signature cocktail was called Void Burn, and it came with a disclaimer that the management was not responsible for customers who achieved enlightenment through liver damage. The galaxy's various species learned a valuable lesson about humanity's relationship with the cosmos. They were the only known civilization that could look at ultimate cosmic horror and see a franchise opportunity. As for the ancient entity, it discovered that the universe's most terrifying force wasn't something that fed on fear. It was something that could commodify it. The cosmos, it turned out, had a sense of humor after all. It was just a very expensive one,